and welcome to this Aging Well workshop hosted by North Dakota State University and South Dakota State University. My name is Lacey Brown. I am an NDSU Extension Gerontology Specialist located at the West River Research and Extension Center here in Rapid City. I invite you to use the chat to share where you're located. It's always fun to see who we reach with this webinar series. We are on Zoom webinar today, and all attendees' microphones and cameras are off. Enjoy the event, and be sure to ask questions anytime during the event using the Q&A button. We will address your questions at the end of the workshop. Using the chat button, feel free to type where you are from or anything else you want to share. Maybe the weather. Everyone loves to talk about the weather, so maybe share what the weather's like in your neck of the woods. Please reserve or direct rather your questions to the Q&A box. That is where I will be looking when I am helping facilitate the Q&A at the end of this presentation. The question and answer box is located, I have to look, at the bottom of your screen. We have folks joining from DeSmet, Western South Dakota, Dickinson, South Dakota. We have Yankton, South Dakota, folks from Fargo. Welcome, everyone. We're glad to have you here with us today. If you are using a tablet or phone, you may have difficulty seeing the chat and Q&A buttons. I encourage you to tap the screen and those buttons should appear, and then you can add comments to the comment section or questions to the Q&A box. Also, let us know if you are having technology issues in the chat box. I will be watching, as will my colleague Matt, to help troubleshoot any issues. For those of you who are viewing today as part of our watch party, we are glad to have you. Please write your questions down and give them to your host. Your host will type them in the Q&A box for our speaker to answer. If you are just joining, my name is Lacey. I'm a gerontology field specialist. I am located at the West River Research and Extension Center in Rapid City, South Dakota. We have about 2 minutes before the webinar begins. Welcome, everyone, to this Aging Well workshop. We have about 1 minute before we begin. Friendly reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A box. That is where I will look in at the end when we do Q&A. Reserve the comment box for your comments and feedback. We will look through both, but questions need to be in the Q&A. If you are just joining, I am Lacey Brown, a gerontology field specialist located at the West River Research and Extension Center, located in Rapid City. We are about to begin, so I will now introduce our speaker. With us today, we have Philip Estepp. He is the Extension Gerontology Specialist with North Dakota State University. His work focuses on aging well and supporting older adults and caregivers through education and community-based programs. Philip works closely with communities across the Dakotas to help people better understand aging-related challenges and to promote practical, research-informed strategies that support healthy independence and quality of life as we age. Philip has a MS in counselor education and human development with a background in substance use counseling and behavioral health. I'm going to turn the floor over to Philip.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Lacey. I have my slides here. Can everybody see those? All right, I'll assume so. And get started with this very interesting topic of family estrangement. So the title of the presentation is Navigating Family Estrangement. So our learning objectives are going to be to define estrangement. So what is it when we talk about estrangement? What does that even mean? And there are a few different definitions that we'll go over. We'll try to understand some common themes in estranged relationships. We'll try to understand how estrangement can negatively impact us as we age. We'll learn practical steps to minimize the impact of estrangement, and we'll identify some credible sources of support. So it can be professional support and be able to identify sources that you might come across online or elsewhere. So the first question is, why discuss estrangement? Why are we talking about this topic? So family support plays an important role in aging. Okay, so everything from health decisions to caregiving to daily assistance to emotional support, family members are a primary source of that support for most people. Estrangement is not well understood. That's the second point why we're discussing estrangement. The third is it's timely. There's increased attention on the topic. So right now, more so than in previous years, you'll see a lot of articles, TV shows, other things that have a theme of estrangement in them. Tabloids, newspapers, etc. Estrangement seems to be a bit of a hot topic. And so we'll talk about exactly what it is and what it isn't so that we can understand what is meant by it. And then finally, proactive planning supports well-being and independence. So when we better understand estrangement and how it can negatively impact us, we can be proactive and minimize its impact on us if we're experiencing the estrangement or in providing support for friends or family members. So defining estrangement. There are a couple main definitions that the researchers use, and the information that I'm sharing with you today is pulled primarily from evidence-based and published articles. So many of those come from the Cornell Family Estrangement and Reconciliation Project. That's probably the biggest survey and focus groups and research project that's been done on the topic of estrangement specifically. There are some European studies that I'll cite as well, but the Cornell studies are the most relevant. Those are done in the US and they've been done relatively recently. So the data from those are the most up-to-date and accurate. So when you see me pulling percentages and numbers, most of that comes from the Cornell Family Estrangement Project. They define estrangement as no contact between two or more relatives for some period of time. Okay. And the second part to that is self-identification as being estranged. So estrangement, no contact between two or more relatives, and identifying as estranged. Other definitions that you might come across of estrangement might be emotional estrangement. So this is where there might be occasional contact, but there's a general lack of closeness and support. So maybe you see a family member, but that family member is not providing support, and there's a lack of any kind of emotional closeness that's different from how it was in the past. Okay. The statistics we'll look at are based just on the first definition up here, strictly no contact between two or more relatives for some period of time. So if you had to guess how common estrangement is, what would you say? So what percentage of adults in the US report being estranged from a family member? Do you think A, 5%, B, 12%, or C, 27%? Thinking just of maybe your relationships or the relationships that you know of from close friends, or maybe from the stories that you read about other families. The percentage that we get from the Cornell Family Estrangement Project, so a representative survey of people across the US, is at 27%. Okay, this is the percentage of adults in the US reporting being estranged from at least one family member. That's a lot, right? That's over a quarter of US adults. So how do those numbers break down? So that of that 27%, 10% were estranged to a parent or a child, 8% were estranged to a sibling, and 9% were estranged to another relative. Okay, so another relative being maybe a aunt or uncle or cousin or other extended family. So you see the two main categories here are parent or child, and then sibling. Okay. Another interesting bit that they found is that you're more likely to be estranged if you are between the ages of 35 and 64. So why is it, do you think that these are the ages where you're more likely to be estranged for someone? And from what we could tell from the research, 35 to 64, you're just more likely to have more living relatives. Okay. You're more likely to have a parent or a grandparent, and you're more likely to have children and other family members that you can be estranged from. So that's why there's that likelihood between the ages of 35 and 64. At below 35, maybe you do not have children that you could be estranged from, and so that's where that increase comes from. The research also found that estrangement happens to people of all walks of life. So, age, race, region that you live in the US, gender, etc. There wasn't really one group that was singled out as more likely to be estranged from someone else. So risks between parent and child and risks between siblings are most common. You see, they're the 10% and the 8%. So this is interesting because it's really universally something that people across the U.S. experience. Uh, Siblings are significant because they're another source of support as we age, not just parents or children. So the questions that the researchers asked then was, is this an overestimation? Are people overestimating these estranged relationships? So they asked a follow-up question, which is, how upsetting is it to you that you are estranged from a relative? Okay, so maybe the estrangement isn't upsetting. So it might be an example of, for example, not being close to an uncle or an aunt anymore. That's not unusual. So maybe you're geographically separated and you just haven't talked to that person for a number of years. Okay. That's not what estrangement is. That's just kind of drifting apart or a lack of contact. But when they asked how many people were upset, okay, about this estranged relationship, you're still left with 22%. And that translates to about 55 million Americans. Again, that's a huge number of individuals in the US who are experiencing this estrangement. So when we talk about, why is this an important topic to discuss? One of the reasons is because it's so common. So why does estrangement matter? Okay. And the primary reason why estrangement matters is because family matters. Okay. Research shows that our happiness depends on reliable, secure, and predictable social relationships. We're hardwired for sociality and we need positive connections to others. It's essential to our health and well-being, not just our emotional health, but our physical health too. So estrangement is a threat to the stability and connection that family relationships offer. For most people, those reliable, secure, and predictable relationships come from their family members. It comes from brothers and sisters, from parents, from cousins, from grandparents, etc. So any threat to that family structure, okay, is going to have a negative impact on individuals' well-being. Now, those relationships are especially impactful in the earlier and later stages of life. So earlier in life, right, as children and as adolescents, we really depend on having those healthy parental relationships or relationships with grandparents who could be role models. And they offer us support. Of course, as children, we need that support constantly. And then as we grow older and in later adulthood, we again become more reliant on having those supports, somebody to help us in caregiving, somebody to offer transportation, as well as emotional connection. So that's probably the primary reason that estrangement really matters and why it needs to be addressed or talked about. So let me go back here a second. So we talk about estrangement as a threat to the stability and connection of those family relationships. I'm going to talk about 4 threats of family estrangement here. So what are 4 negative impacts? that are a result of estranged relationships. Again, these are pulled from that Cornell family estrangement research. So they did a large number of surveys and then focus groups where they were able to get in-depth interviews from individuals who identify as being estranged. They took those interviews and then broke them down according to themes, and out of that, a number of themes emerged. So threats of family estrangement. The first one that I have up here is living with chronic stress. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail shortly. But living with chronic stress, this is different than acute stress. So acute stress might come from, your car running out of gas and now you're in a not a great situation, right? Stress of calling family, needing to find somewhere, maybe needing to push your car, etc. There are moments of these acute stresses that are just a part of life. And we tend to deal with those a lot better than chronic stress. Chronic stress is a stress that is persistent and over time. Okay. So an estranged relationship where you're uncertain about a parent, okay, or a child or a sibling, etc., brings with it a constant amount of worry and anxiety. And that can take a real toll on both your physical and your mental health. Okay, so that's the first threat of family estrangement. Second one is broken attachment. So as children, we bond with our caregivers. Okay. Most often that's our parents, and it could be our grandparents. It can also be siblings where we have these attachments. Losing someone you're bonded to can trigger a grief response. Okay. It can cause separation anxiety and a yearning for the relationship that's been lost or broken. Okay, so it's very distressing when we're no longer able to connect with someone who for a long time was a loved one, right? And who still is a loved one, someone like a parent or a sibling. Okay. The third one is the pain of rejection. So being rejected is painful and can damage our sense of self-worth and self-esteem. It also brings with it questions of, is there something wrong with me? What's the issue? Why does this person not want to be associated with me? Or why did this relationship fail? Okay. And so you might attribute that to issues with yourself. And the fourth is the high amount of uncertainty that comes with an estranged relationship. It's described as ambiguous loss sometimes. So ambiguous loss is where somebody is physically absent but emotionally present. So that person, you might not see them or have contact with them on any regular basis, but they're always on your mind. You're thinking about them. If you have an estranged child, of course, you might be wondering, where are they? Are they safe? What are they doing? Do they need my help? And there's also uncertainty around the rejection. So why don't they answer my calls? Will I ever see them? What did I do? Etc. So you can see from these negative impacts here that it could have a real effect on your physical and mental well-being over time. So chronic stress, broken attachment, rejection, uncertainty can be profoundly distressing. And it also impacts your other relationships too. So there are ripple effects. An estrangement between two individuals can have both immediate and generational impacts. So there's uncertainty about relationships with other siblings, children, or family members. If one family member is estranged, that might lead you to suspect or be worried about losing another family member. So maybe one parent has broken off contact with you, okay, or a child has broken off contact with you, and that leaves you uncertain about those other relationships. Another ripple effect is alliances or triangulations between family members, okay, or sometimes just called taking sides. So breaks are oftentimes not clean, and so especially in the case with siblings or where you have a larger family, you might have people feeling like they're being forced to take a side. Okay, I'm going to take the side of the parent, or I'm going to take the side of the estranged child. And of course, that means alliances might form. Okay, you might have people who are empathetic to one side or the other side, and that can cause further rifts and issues in the family system. When I talk about triangulations, if you imagine a triangle, right, there's the two estranged individuals. So in this example, we'll talk about a mother and a daughter. Okay, so the mother and the daughter do not talk to each other. Where's the third point of that triangle? Maybe that's the brother. Okay. So now the brother's job is to talk to both the mother and the daughter and, maybe relay how they are doing, or relay that they still don't want to talk to you. Okay. You're pulling somebody else into this estranged relationship. And that's what we refer to as a triangulation between family members. And of course, that's not just stressful for the mother and daughter in this example. That's stressful for the brother, okay, or whoever else is being pulled into the situation. So that's another example of those ripple effects that we get from estrangement. Another ripple effect is being cut off from extended family. So I'll give an example here. Two brothers, maybe they get together with their families. Of course, these are adult brothers. They get together with their family members for a Thanksgiving dinner. The two brothers get into an argument. Who knows what they're arguing about? If you have siblings, you can probably think of a number of reasons why an argument might ensue. But it's bad enough where one brother says, "That's enough. We're out of here." Okay, and so they take their family and they leave, and the argument leads to an estrangement. Okay. And so not only are those two brothers no longer talking and they've chosen to cut contact, maybe for months, maybe for years, but now those children, okay, are more likely to experience being cut off from extended family, right? The um, other family members, okay, it creates a divide. And so now, if those children are young, they might grow up without the support of their cousins, right? Without the support of their uncle, without the support of that side of the family. And that can go on for generations, where you're essentially splitting that family in half because of a disagreement or an estrangement between two people. So being cut off from extended family is a real effect. You might call it a ripple effect or collateral damage of this estrangement. Whatever it is, it's important to realize that it doesn't just impact the two individuals. It can impact entire family systems, through either these alliances or being cut off. Now we're going to talk about pathways to estrangement. So what leads to estrangement? What themes were identified in the research? And when we talk about these pathways to estrangement, I want you to keep this image in mind and this story here. And maybe you're familiar with the story, but it's the story of the blind men and the elephant. So it's six blind men, and they're all, okay, examining this elephant. Okay, the one who is touching the tusks, right? It's a spear. The one touching the ears, it's a fan. Okay, the one touching the broadside there, it's a wall. Okay, if you touch its trunk, it might be a snake, or the tail, it might be a rope, etc. Now, they're all examining the same object, right? They're all examining this elephant, but depending on their perspective and their sensory perception, they're going to experience the same thing, the same object, very differently, right? The person touching the tail is going to experience something very different than the person touching the tusks. And so this is kind of an analogy of even though we, maybe grow up in the same families or we have the same experiences, whether they're good or bad as family members. We can experience those situations very differently. So the parents might experience something different than the child did. It might be a traumatic event for the young child, but it might be no big deal to the older child. So it's important to realize that perspective plays a huge role in these pathways to estrangement that we're going to discuss in a little more detail here. So, like I mentioned, the blind men describing the elephant, family members may experience the same event very differently. Perspective taking does not mean agreement. Okay. It means recognizing that more than one story can coexist. That's also an important point. When we're hearing out or listening to somebody else, it doesn't mean that we have to agree with their interpretation, but we do need to recognize that it's a reality for them. Sometimes the reasons for estrangement are unclear, okay? And that can be especially distressing. So recognizing the role of perspective and perception can help us better understand the situation. So it's not uncommon for a parent to wonder, why is this individual? Why is my son? Why is my daughter? Why is my brother not speaking to me? And you might have little bits of the story, but for some people, they're truly baffled at why they're experiencing such a dramatic reaction to something they thought was no big deal, okay, or something they didn't understand fully. And that's sometimes a lot more distressing than someone who knows what the reason for the estrangement is. Okay. So whether this applies to yourself or to others, it's important to keep that in mind when we're listening to people. And sometimes the best thing we can do is just have a non-judgmental, take a non-judgmental and empathic stance when we're listening to these stories, understanding that there are multiple sides. So some other themes that emerged from some of this large-scale research on estrangement are these pathways to estrangement. Now, this list isn't exhaustive, but these are themes that come up repeatedly that people list for, what might have caused the estrangement. Number one is unresolved issues from the past. Okay, so these are problems that occurred growing up in the family. It might include harsh parenting, okay, favoritism, neglect. You could mention abuse in there, a whole bunch of different issues. Okay, but whatever they are, they're unresolved issues from the past, and this might lead to an estrangement between siblings. Okay, when we think about favoritism, why did our parents favor you more? Why were you their favorite? Why did I feel left out or neglected, etc. It depends a lot on perspective there. Harsh parenting might be something that they perceived as being an issue growing up. Okay. And maybe this is a reason for being estranged. So maybe they want to cut off ties to a parent because they do not want their children to grow up with that influence in their lives, etc. So unresolved issues from the past emerge as a common theme when talking about pathways to estrangement. A second common pathway is divorce. Okay, so loss of contact with a parent might become an issue. Hostility between parents can definitely drive a wedge between family relationships. So if two parents are fighting constantly, or the relationship is abusive, that's going to cause some real damage to the family unit there. And that's a little more understandable when we talk about estrangement, why you might go with one parent over the other, especially if it's one person who's kind of seen as at fault. Now, in situations of divorce, fathers tend to move away more often than mothers do, and they also typically have more issues obtaining custody. So, in situations of estrangement as a result of divorce, it's more common for a father to be the estranged parent in these cases. Fathers will often do some be off starting new relationships, okay, and maybe establishing a new family unit, and that might cause some tensions between their ex and their family. Third one is problematic in-laws. This is probably the most stereotypical one when we talk about reasons for family conflict and estrangement. But problematic in-laws are conflict between family of origin, essentially, and your family of marriage. Okay. And balancing loyalty to spouse with family can sometimes be really tricky. Parents might see the situation very different than the person who is trying to be loyal to their spouse. So a parent might see it as protecting their son or daughter from a bad relationship. Okay. The in-law might see it as protective, in-laws who want to end the relationship. Okay. For, who knows, 100 different reasons. Now, if you're the individual caught between, their spouse and their family member, that leaves you in a really tricky situation. That's a good one to kind of put yourself in their shoes and try to understand, what was it like integrating with my family of marriage? How was it my relationship with my in-laws when I was first introduced? And so that's a good uh, kind of a thought experiment for getting into somebody else's shoes. What was your experience like back then? And can you see where being pulled between those two those two right, between loyalty to spouse and loyalty to family can cause some issues in the relationships. So that's number 3 for pathways to estrangement, problematic in-laws. Number 4 is money and inheritance. Um, Talking about money, not paying back a loan can be a reason for estrangement. Deceiving out of funds, okay, saying you need money for something that you really didn't, or using it for something else can be a real source of conflict. And it's not so much the money as much as trust in many situations. So damaging that trust and maybe putting the other party in a difficult situation by taking their resources or deceiving them out of resources. Not providing financial support. So maybe you feel like you deserve some financial support, or you've given financial support in the past, and now this individual does not want to provide you with financial support. That can be a reason for conflict in families that might lead to estrangement. So those are mostly money issues. Another one is inheritance. Okay, so conflicts over wills. Who deserves what? And this really underscores the importance of planning. This might be more of an issue amongst siblings after a parent passes away or after a grandparent passes away. If you have a sibling who lived geographically distant and they were not involved in caregiving for the parent, or they did not offer their resources or funds to help out, then they might be upset when half of the estate or half of the inheritance goes to that sibling who was very much uninvolved in all the hard work. So it might be an issue of, feeling like you deserve something that you didn't get, or that person did not deserve that. In planning and thinking about who's part of your care team, who's going to help provide for me, who gets what, after I die, you can help avoid some of those conflicts that might arise because of perceived unfairness. Number 5 is unmet expectations. So what are my expectations? This can be an issue with children. This could be an issue with parents or an issue with siblings. As a parent, you might feel like your grandparents should be more involved with taking care of the grandchildren. If they're not as involved, maybe you feel like that's some kind of a betrayal or a message that they don't want to be involved in your family. Or with siblings, how involved are they in caregiving and financial support? There are a lot of reasons why unmet expectations might lead to family conflict. But again, you have to ask yourself the question, what are my expectations for this family member? realizing that we all have different strengths and different abilities, and we're all able to help out maybe in different ways. But when those expectations aren't met, that leads to disappointment, and that disappointment can be a source of conflict. And the sixth theme that emerged through the research was value differences. Okay, and this one tends to get highlighted the most, I think, in popular media, but basically an estrangement due to disapproval of a relative's core values. So this might include things like their religion or faith, their politics, okay, their lifestyle, etc. If those values are in conflict, that could be a source of contention and again lead to that estrangement. So again, this list isn't exhaustive, but it's a source of um, it's a good list of the themes that emerge from the actual research on the topic while doing those in-depth interviews and surveys with the U.S. population. So I want to shift gears here and talk a little bit about estrangement as it applies to aging and why that's an important topic for older adults to be aware of. So as we age, family plays a larger role in transportation and daily help. Okay, those of you who rely on your family members could see that firsthand how big of a aid they are for just day-to-day issues, right? Health decision making, okay, is a big one that family members play a role in. Emotional connection, just having someone to talk to call, to text with, to share stories with, to share memories with. Caregiving during illness or recovery, okay, is another large role that family plays. And then end of life planning. Okay, so when family rifts develop, these supports may be reduced or they may be unavailable. So when going to the hospital, maybe for a surgery, for a knee surgery, for example, there's going to be somebody there, maybe the doctor, if you're in a smaller community, maybe a nurse or another staff member who's going to ask, what are your supports? What's your support system? Who can drive you home? Who can take care of you? Who can get your groceries and help with chores around the house for the next few weeks while you recover? Okay. And if we have a family member who lives in the same town as us, but who is estranged, maybe we feel embarrassed or unwilling to share that, yes, I have a family member in town, but they're not going to help me out with this. Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about having a care team and having people who you can turn to and trust who are available if you are in a situation when family cannot be there for you. There are very real impacts on caregiving. So as a result of an estrangement, you might have fewer informal supports. You have fewer people to help out with daily needs if you're estranged from family. You might rely more heavily on friends or paid services, and the paid services is a big deal because they're typically pretty expensive, and so having to rely on paid services versus the aid of family can be a huge burden or even impossible in a lot of situations if you can't afford it. It can lead to greater experiences of stress during health changes. Okay, so having to go through a surgery or have reduced mobility, even for a temporary period in time, not being sure who's going to help you out can significantly increase the stress that you experience during that health challenge. It also leads to increased strain on the individuals who are there to help. So if fewer children or family members are involved, caregiving responsibilities may fall unevenly or strain family caregiving resources. Okay. So even if you have other family members, the loss of a family member due to estrangement can negatively impact them and their ability to be caregivers. Another issue is making complicated medical decisions. So estrangement can create uncertainty around who should make healthcare decisions, okay? Especially if you don't have other family members who are close by who can help in those decisions. Um, who is listed as power of attorney? Okay, if that was a child and now they're estranged, should they still have that role as your power of attorney? Okay, probably not. So some planning needs to go into that. Who's going to take over that role? Who is going to communicate with providers if I'm not able to, or if I need assistance? So planning ahead becomes especially important in these situations where family roles and responsibilities are unclear. Um, I talked earlier about estrangement as having very real emotional and physical health consequences. And so just as an overview here, there I have the emotional impact, okay, and then the physical impact. Um, and the physical impact largely due to the effects of the chronic stress involved with the estrangement. So for emotional impacts, we have grief. Okay. So even though the person's still living, you can experience this grief. Okay. They're not there anymore. That relationship isn't what it used to be. And so people experience those very real feelings of grieving the relationship, whether that's a child grieving not having a parent in their life anymore, or a parent grieving not having a child or a grandchild in their life. Um, that emotion impact is very real. Loneliness or social isolation are huge as well. So if that family member was a source of getting out of the house and doing things in the community, and they're no longer available for that, okay, that can definitely lead to being more isolated, which can have a host of negative health and uh, emotional impacts. Feelings of regret are huge. Okay. Feelings of shame and embarrassment over the situation are another issue. So when you're socializing with other friends, they might ask, how is your daughter? How is your son? How is your brother? Okay. And feelings of embarrassment might arise over having to explain that, I haven't really talked to them in a long time, or she doesn't want to talk to me, etc. So there's the emotional impact. There's also a physical impact of chronic stress, which can include everything from higher blood pressure, inflammation in the body, sleep issues, a weakened immune response, a much higher risk of anxiety and depression, and of course, a worsening of existing chronic conditions. If you're already in poor health, the chronic stress definitely does not help in any kind of way. So it's important to recognize that there are very real physical impacts to the estrangement. So practical steps. What are some practical steps that I can take if I'm experiencing this, or practical steps I can talk to with friends who might be experiencing this, or just things to keep in mind? Again, this isn't exhaustive, but it provides an overview of some things to think about. The first one is clarify healthcare and financial decision makers. Okay, so it's important to designate a proxy or a power of attorney who is not an estranged family member. Okay, it's important to complete your advanced care directives, and it's important to create and then maintain a will or trust. Keeping those documents updated and available and findable is going to be important. A second practical step is to identify trusted non-family supports. So who can you trust, okay, and turn to in times of need or for support beyond your immediate family? The third is building up your care team, okay? So this can include your friends, this can include your faith community, your neighbors, trusted medical providers, etc., who can be a resource for current or anticipated needs. So even if you do have family who lives close by, having a care team is going to be important to, one, reduce the burden on family. If you have a neighbor that can help out with an issue, that's going to be easier than having to call somebody to travel into town and help you with a task. It's important for um, remaining engaged in the community. So having this care team is going to be a good practical step that anyone, regardless of their situation, can take. Just having those people identified and letting them know too that they are a part of your team and that you count on them and that you rely on them. Just sharing that appreciation and letting them know is usually all they need. Staying socially connected, so build social capital through volunteer work, maintaining friendships, and joining in events in your community. So events in the community can be anything from doing something like you're doing today if you're joining us from a watch party, or taking one of our exercise classes that we offer. Just being connected and having that social connection through those friends and community members um, is an important practical step that you can take. And the last practical step is seeking counseling. Seeking counseling, mediation, or other sources of professional help if you're in a situation where an estrangement is negatively impacting you. Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about those professional sources of support in a bit here. Again, not an exhaustive list, but some things to start getting you thinking about what are some things I can do to either improve my situation if I'm experiencing that kind of relationship or help others. Now, reconciliation. So along with estrangement comes, the topic of reconciliation. So is estrangement, the end all? Is it going to be forever? Research shows that oftentimes reconciliation happens after an estrangement. And so reconciliation, sometimes it can just take a nudge where somebody is pushed to rethink that relationship and to resume contact. Okay, sometimes it can be months, sometimes it can be years, sometimes it can be a lot longer. But when talking about reconciliation, it's important to note that circumstances, can change. Oftentimes, those relationships are frozen in time. So maybe you stop talking to a sibling, in the 1990s, and it's been 30 years now. Has that person matured? Do they have their own family? It's going to be a totally different ball game. And so understanding that people change is a realization that a lot of people have that leads to reconciliation. Um, Other reasons for reconciliation are getting back into the family. Again, families are important resources of help, and it's important to keep those in mind. And sometimes people just want to be a part of that group again, and that's motivation for reconciliation. I have up here the trans-theoretical model of change. When we're talking about reconciliation, I don't know if you can see my cursor up on the screen, but people often start in that pre-contemplation phase where there's no intention of changing a behavior. So maybe here you're in an estranged relationship. And it's important to note that that pre-contemplation stage can last a very long time. But when people are ready for change, they tend to follow this cycle of thinking about it, preparing to take action, taking action, and then maintaining that relationship. And then you see the relapse arrow up here, and it's important to note too that sometimes relationships cycle in and out of estrangement. Now, it's important to note too that reconciliation is sometimes not possible. Okay. Sometimes the estrangement happens for a good reason, okay, or for a reason where the estrangement is beneficial to one or both parties, okay? And that's in cases where the estrangement protects the person's well-being, okay? So cases of abuse or neglect, this might be the case. In cases where one or both parties do not desire to reconcile, you're probably not going to have reconciliation. And the third point I'll highlight here is if there are underlying issues due to addiction or behavioral health issues, okay, that make reconciliation unsafe or unfeasible without first addressing the underlying issue, okay? So as a support person, you shouldn't push reconciliation. That's not always the best option. And again, empathic listening and withholding judgment is sometimes the best approach. And I'll just briefly cover these because I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end here. But the world of behavioral health professionals is pretty confusing. Who's a LCSW and what's an LPC or LPCC? And here I have them kind of laid out. But these are going to be the common helping professionals who can be turned to navigate an estrangement because every situation is different. Okay. Every family unit is going to bring its own history to these individuals, and so there's not a one size fits all approach. But these professionals are best suited for helping you navigate the situation and your particular relationship that you're having. So a licensed clinical social worker is a great person to turn to. Licensed professional counselors, um, marriage and family therapists. They often specialize in family systems and can be a great resource. Clergy members, again, they'll vary greatly in their expertise. Some have background in counseling, some don't. Mediators, they're often useful for disputes over wills or issues of inheritance. Okay, so a financial mediator or a family mediator, and then you might come across a licensed psychologist. Other professionals like your primary care provider, they might be able to direct you to resources that are helpful. A psychiatrist isn't very helpful. They're unless you're in a smaller community and they also do counseling. The counseling isn't actually a big part of usually what they do. Um, your extension agents will be able to direct you to resources sometimes, but they're not psychologists either. So advise not turning to them for this kind of help. But other professionals in the community might be able to point you in the right direction. Something I wanted to highlight too before we wrap up is estrangement as a result of an addiction or a behavioral health issue. Okay. So in these cases, estrangement is often the result of needing to set healthy boundaries, okay, because of the underlying issue. In these cases, groups like Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, Families Anonymous, and Smart Recovery Family and Friends. These are all support groups that you might find in your community. Not every community has these, but of all of these, you'd probably be most likely to find an Al-Anon group. This is not Alcoholics Anonymous. This is for the family members of individuals who are experiencing uh, issues due to a family member having a issue with drugs. Okay, and these groups can be great resources for encouragement and help so far as setting healthy boundaries. And sometimes that healthy boundary is cutting off contact for a short while. Finally, I want to talk about choosing credible sources of support. Internet forums and online support groups can be very counterproductive and even harmful. Um, so, imagine a situation where a parent and a child become estranged. The child's going to seek out an internet forum called Children of, Experiencing Estrangement with Their Parents. And everybody's going to have the same theme. I have a toxic mother or a toxic grandmother, and there's a lot of commiserating going on. But you won't necessarily get any kind of professional help or actual evidence-based resources there. Same thing with the grandparent. They'll go to a group for grandparents and they'll hear things like, is my, child or grandchild a narcissist, etc. Again, it's just more of an echo chamber, and you're not usually going to find helpful information there. So be very cautious about internet forums. Be cautious anytime people want your private information. Be cautious about sharing private information and avoid labeling the problem as a disorder or as some kind of a syndrome, because that doesn't leave much room for improvement. And again, magazine and tabloid articles, you have to keep in mind, they're typically written for entertainment purposes and not for education. So just as a review, we defined estrangement. We talked about some of the common themes. We talked about how it can negatively impact us as we age. Hopefully, we learned some practical steps to minimize the impact of estrangement, and hopefully we identified some credible sources of support, including those professional helps. Here are my references and additional sources. And I wanted to leave you with a couple recommendations. If you did want to find some credible sources of information on the topic, these two books are good. They're written by people who have actually done research or who have clinical backgrounds in treating or helping individuals with estrangement. Fault Lines is going to pull the data from that Cornell Family Estrangement and Reconciliation Project. That's a great one. And the second one is Rules of Engagement, which is written from more of a clinical perspective. And here, I'll leave this up on the board as we jump to Q&A.
Nicely done, Philip.
Thank you.
So let's turn off screen share. Oh yeah. We will bring that slide back up. So we've got a couple questions in chat, or excuse me, in Q&A, as well as folks put a couple comments in there. I think we should start with the questions, and then if time allows, we'll go to those comments, because I assume they put them there because they want feedback.
Okay.
So the first is, can we have access to the slides? We're not mailing those or emailing those out. But if someone reaches out directly to you, we could probably let you two give them that way, but we're not going to mail them to the whole or email them to the whole group.
Yeah, I could turn the slides into more of a readable handout here. And I'll have another handout too with some resources on there. But if there's anything in particular you want to pull from there, you can always email me and I'll provide you with whatever information you'd like.
Go ahead and put your contact information back up, Philip. That first slide, go ahead and put that back up so people can write it down. Because if you want something specific on Philip's slide, please email him and he will get it to you. So go ahead and answer that one live. I think this is a really nice question to talk about because you talk about family and relatives. But this person writes, as time allows, please compare, contrast estrangement of family members versus estrangement of longtime friends.
Yeah, that's also an issue. It doesn't fall under that topic of family estrangement, okay? And the research that I'm pulling from here is explicitly on family estrangement and not on friends. But as we know, friends, right, can be part of our chosen family, and losing a friendship because of estrangement or because of a disagreement is pretty distressing too, right? As distressing as losing a family member if they're close friends. So I think a lot of what applies to family estrangement would apply to having an estranged friend. You know, if you look at those pathways to estrangement, or you look at the emotional and the physical impact of estrangement, I think there's a lot of overlap there.
Thank you. So we've got two long comments. Do you want to read those fully, or do you want to read them quietly and then respond to the group?
Here, let me pull up the chat. I don't even have that up.
It's in the Q&A. I'm sorry, forgive me. They put some pretty long stuff in there.
Let's see. Can you just summarize them for me, Alicia? I don't have
Sure.
the Q&A here.
So it says, we have a son whom is the oldest one that has been very distant from us for quite some time. We will visit with him by phone call once in a while, but we do not see him very often at all. He is married and they have two children, which we have not seen in over 2 years. I have tried so many times to try to get together with them, but it seems like he always has the excuse that he's too busy. Says he works very many hours. His wife does not work out of the home. She has a lot she could say about the situation. She has
Okay.
come.
I see that. I see that here. Yeah, you know, that's one of those cases where every family has a different dynamic, right? And a different history and different things that they bring. And so that's one of those cases where I definitely refer you to find one of those helping professionals to help navigate that situation, right? Because if you noticed in the slides, nowhere do I have a this is what you do, right? Or follow these steps to, heal an estrangement, because that advice wouldn't be applicable to everyone, okay? But what is applicable to everyone is if you're in a situation where that estrangement is distressing, or even if it's not a full-on estrangement and total, cut off of communication, finding those helping professionals is your best bet, because you can give them the full story. They know the resources in your community, and they can point you towards some helpful strategies for mending that relationship if that's your goal. Another thing would be to check out those recommended readings, and those can be insightful too, just to see, what are some common themes, and just educate yourself about the issue. But so far as like specific advice um, for a person's situation, looking for that professional help is your best bet.
Thanks, Philip. I think the other comment, let you read it. You can see those now, can't you?
Yep, I got them
Okay.
pulled up.
Okay.
Let me see. Addiction and abuse by parent ignored by other family members can be a situation where long-term, possibly permanent estrangement is best only option to preserve safety, mentality, and physically, especially when family support was non-existent and zero trust. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So those are situations where the estrangement is a result of a healthy boundary, right? And setting healthy boundaries. And so, again, even if family members didn't perceive it as a negative situation, or they don't want to recognize that it's the result of an addiction or behavioral health issue, you recognize it as such and have chosen to, um, you know, put some distance between you and that relationship for health and safety reasons. And so that's where I'd say, there's a special situation in there for those underlying issues. Because until the addiction issue is resolved, you can't really have that healthy relationship, in my opinion. Um, so yeah, I'd look at those addiction supports for family members who are going through those issues, instead of the general family estrangement supports.
Philip, will you advance your slide deck to the last slide?
Yep.
I don't see any more questions.
And I'll pull up the
There are, yep, whoops.
oh,
Fast forward through the slides real quick one more time.
there we go.
Awesome, thank you. So, quick reminder, there are 2 more webinars in this series this year. We will talk about polypharmacy and deprescribing on March 18th, and then we will talk about estate planning on April 15th. The link that you used to get in here today should be the same for all the webinars in this series. Thank you for being here, and we appreciate your time. Oh,
Yeah,
wait,
thank you, everybody.
wait, Philip, a question just popped in. And we have a minute. Can you see it?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Let me address that one quick too, for those who want to stick around for a second. But it says we have more problems than we did 10 to 20 years ago because doctors and professionals encourage distant and estrangement for mental health. So the research here, we don't have a lot of longitudinal data on this topic at all. So it's perceived as there's a lot of issues today with estrangement, and some attribute it to people recommending that as a way to, set these healthy boundaries. Um, we don't know if it's more common today than it was 10 to 20 years ago because we don't have that longitudinal data. But when looking for professional help, it's important, again, to find somebody who's trained in estrangement, who's not going to just point blank recommend estrangement as a solution, because it's not really addressing any of the underlying issues. So, being a little bit picky about who your behavioral health provider is important when we're looking for support. So find one who's trained in estrangement, who doesn't just recommend estrangement without understanding how complicated of an issue it is.
Thank you for that, Philip. And thank you,
Yep.
everyone, for sticking around to hear that answer. And this recording will be posted to the SDSU Extension YouTube channel, maybe by the end of the week, but we say check next week for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.